Okay, kiddos, today we're going to be investigating quadrilateral angles, which will put together the knowledge we learned last week with quadrilaterals and angles and start making sense on how we can start figuring some of this stuff out. You will need the note paper that you picked up, investigating quadrilateral angles, and fill out the notes as we go. All right, our first quadrilateral friend today is called bet you got it, rectangle. So fill that in up there. What do we know about a rectangle? It has two parallel sides, two congruent sides, two pairs of congruent sides. Angle C is 90 degrees. It tells us by that right there. And by rule of being a rectangle, it is all 90 degrees because that is part of what makes it not just a parallelogram, not just a quadrilateral. It makes it so special it has a name called rectangle. If I add these all up together, I would get 360 degrees. All right, name this quadrilateral. Is it a parallelogram? Is it a rhombus? Is it a rectangle? Is it a trapezoid? Is it a square? What is it? All right, we do not have 90-degree angles, so it cannot be a rectangle or a square. So let's look at this. We have, these are parallel. These are parallel. This tells me that all my sides are congruent right there because it's just one tick mark, which would make this guy a rhombus because it has to have all congruent sides. So with a rhombus, we need to know that if our sides are congruent and our sides are parallel, the opposite angles are the same. So if that's 115, the opposite angle is also 115 degrees. So when we start talking about these angles, this is how they test you on STAR. You have to know that the properties of it make it to where the opposite angles are so that you can figure everything out. So let's figure out what the rest of the angles are. So we need to have 115 times 2, or you can add it together, and I get 230. I need to subtract that from 360 because I'm sure you remember that all the interior angles of a quadrilateral equal 360. And so I get 130. What you need to realize is 130 is the sum of angle G and angle H. Since I know they're congruent based on my little symbols here, I can divide 130 into two equal parts, to get the measurement. So if we quickly do that, that would be 65 degrees for each of them. And so if you think about it, it does make sense that this would be 65 and this would be 65, because one of the things we have also talked about is that when the sides are congruent, those adjacent angles add up to 180. And so we're starting to see the relationships here. This would add up to 180, this would add up to 180, and this would add up to 180. So the sum of all the angles is 360. You can do the math and check that out. It is so wonderful that it does it just like that. All right, now I'll name this quadrilateral. We have a shape that has a set of parallel sides here and another set of parallel sides. These sides are congruent, but I do not have 90 degrees as my angle. So name that quadrilateral. This quadrilateral's name is a parallelogram. All right, so again, we have congruent sides, so we also will have congruent and parallel sides. So we will have congruent and parallel angles. That makes angle K 130 degrees. Some of you might already be able to figure out what this is off the top of your head doing some of that wonderful mental math. In case you can't, I have 130 times 2. That will equal 260. You know you're subtracting it from 360 because we know that the angles will add up to make 360. So I am left with 100, which is equal to the angle L plus angle J. So since they're congruent and they're parallel, I can divide it in half, and half of 100 is 50. So again, that rule where the adjacent angles add up to 180 is showing its head again. So as you can see, 50 plus 130 is 180, and it works all ways. So because it's congruent and because it's parallel, we have that rule. And like I've said, or have thought I've said, you will be proving these in a later class geometry. You'll be proving these theorems and that why it's always an absolute. Right now, just please accept that it is and know the properties of it, and we'll go from there. All right, you're on the backhand side of the page, and there are two shapes. What I want you to do is to pause the tape for both of them, and then I want you to check them on the tape. So I'm going to pause it, and then we'll come up with the answers, and then we'll do those two word problems together. All right, here's this one. It's a square. We know that it has 4 right angles. 4 right angles would be 90 degrees each. Add those all up and you get 360. So let's check the next one. All right, our friend here is a trapezoid. Because the sides are congruent, now this isn't true with all trapezoids. This trapezoid happens to have congruent sides. So because these sides are congruent, the angles are congruent right here. So if it didn't have the congruency mark, we would not be able to make this assumption that the angles are the same. So with that, we can get 45 by doing our math. So let's talk about these word problems. How will this help us? Let's consider the following. Mr. Warris surveyed his trapezoid-shaped farm. The first 3 angles had the measure of 60, 120, and 110. Identify the method Mr. Horace could use to find the measure of the 4th angle. So sometimes it's helpful to draw a picture to even get the trapezoid shape in your head. So we know that a trapezoid is like this, all right? And we know that this one angle could be 120. This one could be 110. This one could be 60. And so we're looking for the measure of this angle. And so what is the method that we could do? The first thing we could do is to add, and you notice I haven't even gone over the answer choices. We could add 120, 110, and 60 together, and we get 290. We could subtract that from 360 to find out that the angle remaining is 70 degrees. So let's look at our choices. What did we do? We found the sum of the 3 angles. Well, we did that, but was that the only thing we did? No. Find the sum of the 3 angles. We did that part, then subtract from 180. Nope. That part makes it not true. Find the sum of the first 2 angles and divide that number by 2. Well, we could have done that on some of the some of the quadrilaterals previously, but it did not work on this one. Find the sum of 3 angles and then subtract from 360. That is what we did. So sometimes working it out the way you know will help you decide how to do that. All right, look at the parallelogram. Which of the following could be the measure of the angles of the parallelogram? Well, what do we know about parallelogram? We know this side and this side are parallel. This side and that side are parallel. What about congruent? Yep, we know that this side is congruent, that side and that side are congruent. So that means that we're going to have angles with the same measurements. Okay, so if we look at this first one, 120, 57, 120, 63. Well, the first thing I can do is even just think 120 times 2 is 240 plus 57, and I'll get 297.63. Let's see what this gets us. Okay, so we do get 360, but since they're congruent and parallel, these two angles can't be right for this shape. So let's look at this one. We have 90, 70, 90, and 110. And again, if I add this all up, it would equal 360. So one of the things you need to check on these is that they are adding up to 360. But again, since we have congruent sides and parallel sides, those two other measurements have to be the same. So those two, oops, it would be that one. Can't be right. So let's look here. We have 65, 115, 65, 115, and we have 60, 60, 125, 125. So both of these, just by looking at it, could fit what we know we need. We know we need two acute angles and two obtuse angles with the same measurement. So now let's see which one equals 360. 115 times 2. $230, and then I need 65 times 2. So 130. Let's see, that would be 360, so that's possible. So let's look at this one. If I have 125 and I add 60 to it, I get 185. And so since I have that twice, I know that should be 180. So that one cannot work for us. So the answer to this one is H. So you do have to be careful with it when it looks right. You cannot just assume that it is right. You have to check the numbers that they equal 360. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I want you to work on your classwork homework, and it is due tomorrow.